Hi everyone, my name is 𝗍𝗏 and I'm happy to welcome you to 𝗙𝗏 and 𝗏𝗏, the series of conferences that 𝗙𝗏 organizes every year at 𝗏𝗏 in Ljubljana since 2010. This year we host the 8th edition of Money Lab, the international network of artists, activists and geeks who experiment with forms of financial democratization. Due to the pandemic, the conference has been transformed into a series of streaming events taking place every Monday at 5 p.m. Central European Time from May 11th to June 29th, 2020. Neoliberal policies have reorganized the basic care provisions previously considered cornerstones of democratic life: healthcare, housing, access to knowledge, right to asylum, freedom of mobility, social benefits, etc., turning them into tools for surveilling, excluding, and punishing the most vulnerable. In the light of these processes, a growing wave of initiatives have been questioning the political and economic framework of care and experimenting with its collective reorganization. For today's panel, Care, Solidarity is Disobedience, moderated by the director of 𝗙𝗶𝗁𝗁 Cultural Association 𝗙𝗶𝗿, Davor Mišković, we have invited Tomislav Medak to present the international research project pirate.care, Cassie Thornton to tell us more about the feminist social healthcare project The Hologram, and Maddalena Fragnito to present the experience of 𝗠𝗶𝗵𝘁𝗆, a parent-managed kindergarten in Milan. Tomislav Medak is a PhD researcher at Coventry University Center for Post-Digital Cultures. He is part of the theory and publishing team of Multimedia Institute MAMA in Zagreb, and an amateur librarian for the Memory of the World and pirate.care initiatives. Cassie Thornton is an artist and activist who uses social practices including institutional critique, architecture, and healing modalities to make a safe space for the unknown, disobedience, and collectivity. Maddalena Fragnito is a cultural activist exploring the intersection between art, transfeminism, critical theory, technologies, and politics, focusing on the practices of commoning social reproduction and reappropriation of time, pleasure, economies, and spaces. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that on the MoneyLab8 website, there is a chat where you can post your ideas, suggestions, comments, links, and questions you would like to ask. Toward the end of the session, the moderator will collect the questions from the special guests we have invited to join us here at 𝗏𝗏 today and combine them with those coming from the online audience. Tomislav, Cassie, Maddalena, Davor, welcome. The bandwidth is yours.
Thank you, Janez. We gather here to talk about care, precisely because, as Janez said, we observe certain problem with the care in today's kind of contemporary organization of society. What we can say, it's care is somehow basic human activity, and many social institutions are organized around care because we are all needing care. We are needing care from the moment when we are born. And we somehow today see that kind of care as an activity is under the threat of, let's say, kind of capitalist expansion to different forms of life, as well as in a kind of realm of care. So, but that's not something new. Capitalism is present, I would say, from its beginning in the realm of care, in the care as an activity. It was always there. So, in a way, societies and communities are always kind of differently organized. Care, and in a capitalistic society, of course, there was a kind of intention that care will be organized as a profit-oriented activity or market-oriented activity. So in a kind of thinking about it, it is really kind of not. It's also not the new fact that this is a recognized as a problem. I will remind you to Andrija Štampar. He was a president of the first assembly of the World Health Organizations, and almost 100 years ago he devised some 10 principles in relation to healthcare. And first of his principle is informing the people is more important than any law. So this is something kind of that is really framing some of the activities that we were talking today about, and that our guest will present today. So in Andrija Štampar's view, one of the most important activities in the healthcare was informing people. And he was already then recognized that that could be obstacle from the certain let's say, bureaucratic procedures or idea to protect the certain type of organization of care from those one who imposing the laws. Among other things that Andrija Štampar recognized and he devised in his principles, that is also, I would say, very important today. He said that in a healthcare, no distinction should be made between economically strong and weak. So as Janez mentioned in the beginning, today the economically weak, those who are poor or who are not there is a tendency to be left aside from the care and from the provisions of care. So that's something that I would say it is the problem that we are facing today, and that was recognized almost 100 years ago, again, I'm saying. And one thing that I really liked about his principles, that he said also that doctor must be also a teacher. So somehow that he need to spread the knowledge about the care, about the healthcare in his case. So that I would say that these are basic principles are really framing today's discussions, because today we are talking about bottom-up initiatives where communities and peoples are organizing themselves in order to provide care for themselves and for those in needs in their environment. So again, I would say that the projects that we will present today are recognizing that the fundamental factor in organizing care is collaboration. And I will quote here Valeria Graziano, who said that cooperation of different actors, recognition of power imbalances, and becoming more accountable to the human and non-human actors are prerequisites to shape social change. And she said that this is not linear process, that it could be managed from the singular bird-eye perspective. So we need different views and perspective in thinking and organizing care. So for the start, I would like, normally I will invite Cassie Thornton to join us, but she could not be with us because she's traveling right now, and we will see her presentation of Project Hologram. So she pre-recorded her talk. So I would like to start with that.
Hi, I'm Cassie. I'm coming in by video because I'm currently flying home to Canada, where I currently live. I'm American, but I live in Canada. And I'm the current steward of the Hologram, a project that is about peer support and mutual aid that we've been working on, or different groups have been working on since about 2016. And it's a project that is about sort of creating opportunities for us to experiment with social situations that build trust and create opportunities for interdependence that are not otherwise able to happen in our lives in capitalism. The project began when I was living in Oakland, California, and was living in a lot of precarity, as many people were and as many people are. And I brought together a group of people from across the United States who were all, like me, quite transient, without any sort of medical insurance, and a lot of us without really any access to medical care because it's so expensive in the US, with very precarious housing. And because we all had such precarious housing situations, most of us were not able to live in one city for very long, so didn't really have a stable sense of community. So we got together to think about what it would mean to cooperate. And this group called ourselves, for this week that we were together, the Intentional Community in Exile, and wondered how we could begin to sort of cooperate and share resources so that we could sort of kind of share resources and also support each other in the various different types of emergencies that we were all facing, which meant that we were not able to do the work that we really wanted to do in the world. And the hologram kind of came a bit before, and then we developed it a little bit more in the Intentional Community in Exile. And right before I sort of organized the Intentional Community in Exile, I had been learning a little bit about what was happening in Greece. I'm a long-term debt activist and anti-debt activist, usually working in the United States as both an artist and an activist. But I had been paying a lot of attention to what was happening in Greece because of the debt crisis mixed with the immigration crisis that was happening, starting in 2011 and on until now, really. And what was so interesting to me was that as an American, we were looking at Greece and pointing and saying that they had a crisis. And meanwhile, in the US, especially in Oakland where I was living, there was so much homelessness, so little medical care. And it was a state of emergency with a huge income gap that was really based on race. And it felt like an emergency, but we weren't really calling what was happening in the US at that point a crisis. It was before Trump. And so this project to me was very much about trying to figure out how to take what was happening in Greece when people had admitted that there was a crisis, and they became creative and began to develop projects like free medical clinics all across Greece, versus what was happening in Oakland, California, where we were in denial that there was a crisis. So in some way, this project is about trying to connect those two places and those two very different situations and see what's possible. And so currently, what we've been working on is a project that comes out of what was happening at one particular clinic in Greece, which is called the Social Solidarity Clinic of Thessaloniki. So all across Greece, starting in 2011, doctors, nurses, therapists, dentists, masseuses began to volunteer at free medical clinics all across Greece. And there was at one point, I think, up to 60. And I'm sure many of the people that are watching know about them or maybe are involved. But one particular clinic that really sparked my interest was called the Social Solidarity Clinic of Thessaloniki, and there was a group working inside the clinic called the Group for a Different Medicine, and they were working on a project called the Integrative Care Model. And the Integrative Care Model was a part of a series of attempts to kind of ruin the hierarchies that are implicit in medicine. So gender hierarchies, the hierarchies between patient and doctor, and the hierarchies between genders, between Greek and refugee. And this project in particular was worked in a way where when a patient went into the doctor, they were seen by a therapist, a general practitioner, a doctor, and a social worker. And the social worker was just a volunteer. And they were looking at how their entire health looks as a whole. So they would ask them about what do they eat, where do they work, who is their family. They would talk about intergenerational trauma. They would talk about, to whom do you owe your debts? And then together work with the patient to come up with a plan where the patient was empowered to say what they actually needed to kind of make the next time period, say a year, better. And after talking to some of the organizers of this project, it became clear that, you know, medical practitioners who'd been working for their entire lives, like had a whole new idea of what medical care could be after practicing in this model. And so here's a bit of a model, or a bit of a drawing of what they were doing there. So they no longer called the patient a patient because patient implied someone who was unwell. So they began to call patients incomers, and the patient was seen by a therapist, a social worker, and a GP, and then sent for coffee so that the group could talk. And then when the person came back, they would work together with them to think about what it was that the person actually really needed to thrive in the next year and how to do that without money. And that was really inspiring to me, especially living in Oakland at the time where something like this felt so necessary but so impossible. So along with the group that I was meeting with at the time, and as well as some other friends, we began to just really think about how this model that was happening in Greece, of the integrative care model, how could we apply that when we have no access to, like, we couldn't really squat a space because our cities are too policed. We didn't have experts who would really volunteer. We weren't in contact with that type of community. So how would we do this on our own, given that we are all so precarious and also have been trained to pay for our care? So we came up with a model for how to do this as a peer-to-peer model. And basically, the idea is that the person who's receiving care, who is right now on this drawing, it's labeled an expert. This person, no matter how precarious they are, they become a sort of expert as they share what it is that makes themselves healthy to 3 friends or acquaintances who don't play the role of doctor, social worker, and therapist, but become interested and ask really good questions about these things. So one person asks questions about the expert or the central person's mental and emotional health. One person asks questions about the social health. One person asks questions about the physical health. And I think, you know, for us, and for me, the idea of pressing up against what it means to be an expert, what we're allowed to do, what we're allowed to ask of each other, begins to break some of the routines that we have, the routine ideas and practices we have around what it means to be a part of a community, as well as to get care and to give care. So I'm going to go back to a slide that I passed a bit earlier. At the time when I was living in the US and thinking about this, we weren't really, at the moment, I think that a lot of people weren't ready to admit that we were living in a set of overlapping crises and emergencies. And now I think we can all recognize that those things are upon us and that they are not going away. So the question for us now is, how do you organize your own care before or during an emergency within a set of completely unstable conditions? And especially right now during COVID, how can we actually organize the care we need to be solid enough as individuals and communities so that we can actually withstand what we know is coming? And so, especially because, like, right now, when we're afraid to go to the hospital and the doctors aren't allowed to take patients, what are we going to do? And we don't really know how long this is going to last. So this model becomes a way to distribute the labor of care among people who maybe right now you are not personally in a state of an emergency, but we don't really know, none of us know what's going to happen. So the way that this works is when I say that the hologram, or the person that is receiving care is an expert, we call that person the hologram. And the reason we call that person a hologram is because their health becomes multidimensional. They become a person who explains to these 3 other people what it is that makes them healthy, what doesn't. And say you meet every 3 months. Say we start now, and you're the hologram, and you gather a group of 3 people, and you meet now and then every season after this. And maybe you guys make a commitment to do this for a year or for 2 years. And imagine how much, even in 3 or 4 2-hour conversations, these people might learn about you and what's been going on with you, and you can sort of explain what's, you know, the conditions that you're living in. And those people probably also are experiencing something similar. And so I think there's a way that there's a kind of catharsis and an opportunity for connection within the model that is hidden in plain sight. And again, the role of the patient in this model, we call the hologram, because they become multidimensional. But we treat the hologram like an expert or a teacher, because in our society, it's really not valued to be able to express yourselves, your needs, what makes you vulnerable, what makes you comfortable. Those things are not only not valued, I think they're really shut down. And so in this model, it's really important that we value the person that has needs as a person that has, in a way, a kind of superpower that can cut through the shit value system that we live with. And so the ways that the people that offer support work are really about 3 ways. And we call the people that support the hologram the triangle. And so that triangle, in a way, the goal is to become a different kind of medical record. So they basically support the hologram over time to kind of like really understand what she needs, understand how she works, so that when a big decision needs to be made, like say all of a sudden the hologram is told by a doctor that she really needs to have a really expensive surgery and she'd have to really change her whole life around to get it, to be able to afford it, or because she couldn't continue to do her work. At that time, it would be so amazing to have 3 people who actually know your story, who kind of understand what you've been going through, who can help you figure out if that's actually a viable solution for you, or if there are other options. Because of course, I mean, especially in for-profit medical systems like in the US, the doctor is not going to suggest necessarily the best or most affordable option. So we have the option of doing co-research together. The triangle can do that with the hologram. As I said before, like we're asking a lot of questions. We're just like sort of learning how to ask questions and learning what kinds of questions work in order to kind of find out what's important to know about the hologram's health. And then finally, over time, when the triangle has seen the hologram through some life changes or just over a good amount of time, they begin to become able to notice patterns. So we all have them. It's really hard to see them from the inside, but I think having a group of people that are actually focused on your patterns means that you can identify the patterns that aren't serving you and maybe begin to change them. And then the project becomes viral, and this is really, I think, the most important part, because I think what we have learned in so many different ways is that we have to pay attention to the root of things. We can't look away from the source of where things come from. So we don't want to receive care from people who are not cared for. Not only does it suck, it's just not ethical. And so this project reroutes reciprocation. The hologram at a certain point needs to help the people that are her triangle to become holograms themselves. So the supporters begin to get support. The people that are giving the care end up also with the same care that they were giving. And the hologram needs to support the people that are taking care of her to get their care, not only because it serves her, but because you can't be healthy in an unhealthy community. There's no such thing. And finally, the last sort of step in the growth of a hologram, when we're kind of looking at the microcosmic scale, is that the hologram first needs to make sure that her supporters are supported, but then at a certain point, when that amount of when those sort of hologram pods are all set up, she needs to then turn around and make someone else into a hologram, to sort of see somebody in their life and offer them this model so that they can also experience it and she can become a member of someone else's triangle. And the process is slow and difficult in some ways, but that's actually its power, because it's so different than any form of care or really any kind of community building that we are really able to be a part of, because it happens so gradually, it's so messy, but it does morph and change as it's used. So it moves kind of like a virus. the idea is that it gets taught to someone and then it just grows through them, and they teach their people and those people teach their people. So what's learned gets passed on, and the project changes as it grows. And finally, the project, I think, there's something very charismatic and simple about the sort of social practice element of the project. And I think that the most important thing to say about that is that it can never be taken up by a kind of neoliberal institution like Google, who wants to get their workers, or, to become networked to support each other's care, because it absolutely is a project about training people to revolt, actually, to like understand their connections to other people so that they can be a part of a struggle to end capitalism, and so that they can also live through the end of capitalism. And so I think a challenge of the project is how to imbue this social practice with values that will ensure that it can't be taken up by a corporation or government to do work that should be available, to supply services that should be available to all people. It is extremely inefficient, and so for that reason, I hope that it's safe from becoming an initiative. And I guess I'll close here because I think I'm out of time, but things have been changing very quickly. And I think we've learned through the pandemic that things that seemed like they couldn't change very quickly can, and they can change for the better or for the worse. I think this project is actually about building long-term social infrastructure that can withstand changes, because I think in a way humans, like, we can actually withstand a lot more changes and a lot more and are much more resilient when we're together. But because it feels like so much is going to be changing so soon, and with the end of the pandemic, with lots and lots of people losing their jobs, with so many different things and people to mourn, it seems like it's a really good time to develop some social infrastructure that can exist before, during, and after the coming crises. So I think I'll leave it there.
Well, Cassie got the point. Virus taught us how we are connected. So I will not take much of time. I will give the floor immediately to Tomislav Medak. Yeah.
Thank you, Davor. Thanks, Janez, and thanks, Axioma, for the invitation to Valeria, Marcel, and myself to present this evening or this afternoon. And thank you to all people listening in and hopefully participating to questions. I look forward to those. In this brief intervention, I want to address three things. I first want to outline what we mean by pirate.care. Second, I want to discuss the work that we do around the syllabus or a syllabus of pirate.care, and to nest between Cassie's amazing work on developing practice of the hologram and Maddalena's reflection on childcare, institutional gambit, more on the larger sort of environmental scale problems of emerging from the current situation and purported going back to normal. Okay, first, a couple of thoughts, or what do we mean when we say pirate.care? So first, pirate.care is a project that Valeria, Marcel, and I have initiated with the objective to connect practitioners, activists, and scholars working on the collective practices of mutual aid, solidarity, and care, practices that are emerging in response to the neoliberal crisis of care. Throughout our lives, we depend on the support of our kin, friends, strangers, and institutions to sustain ourselves and to sustain the world in which we and the future generations will live. Yet over the last decades, the convergence of processes such as workfare, rollback of reproductive rights, imposition of austerity measures, and criminalization of migration have denied that vital support to many. This is a process that Davor has already talked about. So in response to this process, practices we have called pirate.care are organizing to help migrants survive at sea and on land, provide pregnancy terminations where those are illegal, offer health support where institutions fail, or liberate knowledge where access is denied. Crucially, these practices share a willingness to openly disobey laws and executive orders whenever these stand in the way of safety and solidarity. And they are willing to enact politics, politicize that disobedience to contest the status quo. It needs to be noted that caring is not intrinsically nice. It always involves power relations and processes of discipline, exclusion, and harm. It is a necessary and skilled form of labor that is shouldered by workers, mostly unwaged women and migrants, who themselves receive the least amount of care while serving those who take care labor for granted. Reciprocity and solidarity are not implied. To address this asymmetry, practices of pirate care are experimenting with forms of self-organization, alternative approaches to social reproduction, and the commoning of tools. Part of that was demonstrated through Cassie's project. Yanis, can I ask you for the first slide? So a bit about our syllabus project. Our project specifically aims to activate collective learning processes from the situated knowledge of pirate care practices. In this, we have been inspired by the phenomenon of #syllabi, that is crowdsourced online syllabi created by social movements in response to the situations of intense antagonism. Some examples of those syllabi are Ferguson's syllabus and Gaming and Feminist syllabus that were created in 2014, Trump 101 and Trump syllabus 2.0 that were created in 2015, or Standing Rock syllabus that was created in 2016. We have written about that phenomenon in our joint article, Learning from Syllabus, which was published by the Institute for Network Cultures and was co-edited by Axioma and 𝗙𝗶𝗿, in fact. There in that article, we have promised to develop a radical pedagogy approach that would help social justice initiatives write online syllabi of their own. And we made a promise to do so in a technological framework that would allow that both the syllabi and the collections of texts that support those syllabi can be collectively created, easily preserved, and maintained independent from large digital platforms and their tools. The typical destiny of a syllabus is that after a while, once the WordPress installation goes broken, you can no longer access it, nor the resources that are supporting it. So we want to think around that problem. As we ourselves are situated between the institutional and the activist terrain, namely some of us in the project are working also on shadow libraries, which we consider a pirate care practice. So as we are situated in this terrain between the institutional and the activist, we were interested in mobilizing institutional resources to support these initiatives so that they could connect between each other and to the larger communities and grow their capacity for collective action through a production of knowledge and radical pedagogy that is inherent to their work and their needs. Next slide. As a first such syllabus, we have decided to create a syllabus around pirate care. The first round of topics in that syllabus, which you see in the screen, on the screen, it's not in the background, I'm basically in the background here. So the first round of topics were written in November of last year during a writing retreat, which we organized together with 𝗙𝗶𝗿 in Rijeka, and it was launched on March 8th for the opening of the Bread, Wine, Cars, Security and Peace exhibition at Kunsthalle Wien. The syllabus, which is still very much a work in progress, currently includes topics of criminalization of solidarity, sea rescue and care, debt and housing struggles, psychosocial autonomy, community safety from racialized policing, transfeminist hacking, hormone toxicity and bodily sovereignty, gender equality in tech milieus, politicizing digital piracy, and, as Maddalena will present briefly, on commoning care work and childcare. The next topic we hope to include will be Cassie's topic on the hologram. Next slide, please. On March 14th, with the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, Maddalena and the three of us have started to transform our work on the syllabus into a collective note-taking effort to document organizing of mutual aid, solidarity, and care in response to the crisis. This effort we have titled Flatten the Curve, Grow the Care. What are we learning from COVID-19? With participation of a broad pirate.care network, we have collected and created around 15 notes, instructions, and how-tos that are coming from and are used by mutual aid organizations in Italy, Croatia, the UK, and elsewhere. The notes are available in English, Italian, German, and Spanish. So the title references the famous graph representing two curves standing for higher or lower rates of contagion. And it represents an unspecified healthcare capacity line, represented as a straight line that the ideal pandemic outbreak should not breach. We wanted to highlight how that straight line is never a straight line, nor is it ever a single line. It actually depicts the decline of society's capacity to care under the relentless neoliberalization and criminalization of solidarity. Also, much in what has been termed the biggest crisis of care in the century isn't so new. With the pandemic, the pre-existing care crisis, until recently visible only on one side of the class, gender, and race divide, suddenly detonated as a generalized social fact or a generalized social threat. But now that the data for the countries of the global north are in and these countries are rushing to go back to normal, it is clear that those who were in the front line in essential services, those who had no choice but to go to work, and who were hardest hit by the epidemic threat remained on that same line of the divide. Thus, there is no one line of care capacity that is afforded to all. Simply, reciprocity and solidarity are not implied for all. Next slide. We know that back to normal would be disastrous, particularly as the world edges toward an environmental breakdown. Just consider one example. How is it possible that a mere week of disruption can cause critical shortages of food worldwide? That as many as 15 million of those living from paycheck to paycheck in the most affluent country in the world, in the US, might need assistance from food banks. That in the global food system, where a third of produced food is wasted, UN is now warning that 265 million will be pushed to the brink of starvation this year. How is it possible that the most fundamental good for maintaining human lives, that is food, could be so scarce yet so wasted? Our food systems are brittle. They are brittle because all high-throughput systems subsumed under the imperative of capitalist accumulation and profit-making require just-in-time efficiency. While seemingly flexible, they have little redundancy and resilience to be adaptable to the exogenous external disruptions such as this pandemic. Global food production has been streamlined to cut the cost of labor, technology, and land. In the aftermath of the present disruption, we are bound to see hyper-automation of farms and recasting of food sovereignty along the nationalist lines. But technology and nationalism will not do away with the brittleness. To do away with brittleness, we will need to reorganize food provision on the principles such as localization, collective holdership, better wages and labor conditions, and internationalism. This is what we are learning from some of the initiatives that we are tracking through Flatten the Curve, Grow the Care, such as Cooperation Birmingham, which is organizing a solidarity kitchen in Birmingham, or Saisonieri, initiative in Austria, which is organizing migrant agricultural workers. Going forward, our systems of provision must not only be protected and bolstered and made strengthened, they also have to be reclaimed, and they have to be detoxified and reorganized along anti-oppressive principles. Our future, if we want one, facing the enormous challenge of environmental disruption, will be defined by a myriad of ruthless struggles to repair this world at different scales. This is where I end.
Thank you, Tommy. Before I give the floor to Maddalena, I would just like to remind you that on Monilab there is open a chat where you can post a comment or question. So, Maddalena, I give you floor. Please.
Okay. So hello to everybody, and thanks to Axioma for having me here in this panel. I'm Maddalena, and today I will talk about a small experience, a self-organized nursery by parents in Milan, born in 2013 and called 𝗠𝗶𝘆𝗆𝗆. A small project which, from my perspective, contains a big issue, that is, how can we organize childcare in a moment when the public service is lacking? And let's say that by practicing this question, the community around this self-organized nursery has led to reflect on issues such as the relation between the nuclear traditional family and the community, the role of social reproduction in the age of its privatization, to rethink care within a feminist perspective, and finally to think about the possibilities and the threat of digital technology when we are in a struggle around our need of care provision. So all this great complexity within this small-scale project has built over the time a particularly strong community. Firstly, because the project answers to a primary need, and secondly, because it produces a continuous turnover of people who have the strength to question bias around what is perceived as good or bad when it comes to raise your kids, or to question fixed gender roles by dissolving the naturalized relationship between women and care, and also to question stereotype around children, no? By learning to give voice and rights to these living subjects who normally are not listened at all, as we adults and institutions do with kids, which are always represented as less, as half humans, meaning, let's say, monsters who need to become quickly domesticated, no? And it is especially around this idea of a half woman who needs to become quickly a fully productive body at work, where digital technology are working hard in order to reduce this unproductive time of life. But I will come later on this aspect. Firstly, I would like to explain how common in childcare, meaning this experimentation such as 𝗠𝗶𝘆𝗆𝗆, which are spreading more and more, are answering both a very material need and the necessity to rethink the field of pedagogy as a battleground through which to maintain the possibility of a better present, no? Of open and livable future, as Tommy was saying before. So let's say that we could look at these practices as the creation of collective tools through which to undo what we have been taught and to collectively reveal the awareness of our needs while escaping what is called by Gypsum Graham as the hegemony of capitalocentrism. So why 𝗠𝗶𝘆𝗆𝗆, and what these parents, which are not friends, have in common? Firstly, they share a completely transformed work context compared to previous generation. Indeed, current jobs with their discontinuous and unpredictable working hours and their atypical contract, especially into the large and deep field of the cultural sector, have generated new needs that are not fully met by public models of early childhood care. This model, in fact, are still, let's say, connected, organized around a working population that no longer exists or no longer represent, let's say, the majority, in particular in large and creative cities such as Milan, where again, the metrics of this enrollment list are connected to the value of a fixed contract job. So many families who are part of the project have to face both an economic precarity and the strained relationship between lifetime and working time. All these people also share the increasing cuts to public schools that have occurred in Italy during the last 30 years. For instance, Italy spent 3.6 point percentage on GDP in public education, while Europe's average is around the 5%. And this percentage has some really practical consequences. The first one is that cuts in public schools funding, and in particular in nurseries and kindergarten, are producing less access to it, meaning fewer places within the public school institution. In fact, the demand for enrollment in nursery for children between 0 and 3 years old far exceeds the offer. No? About 1 in 4 children in Italy are excluded from public list, and a similar percentage can be found in the figure concerning the resignation from work after the birth of the first child, a situation that in Italy still affects mostly women, meaning mothers. No? So it's easy to assume that for reasons concerning both income and organization of time, many families or single mothers do not find sustainable solution once they are excluded from the public nursery list. To conclude, practically, we have a space, 2 teachers, more or less 15 to 20 parents and 10 kids per year. And apparently it's not so different from a public nursery, but indeed the participation of parents into the governance, the management, the maintenance of the space, and the development of the project has created a totally different way to think care connected to pedagogy, and has also created social relationships that are not restricted to the project itself, relationships that have favored let's say, a greater cooperation between people living difficult times. For all these reasons, practicing this common care, this collective care of children has led the community, us, to a wider reflection on society and its forms of organization. We always say, speaking about this project, Sopra Sotto is a space that has been designed specifically for children and especially for adults. I would just add one aspect, which is important, and is about Sopra Sotto attention to the tools of the organization. So this is why we have decided to write an open access manual where step by step we tell how we have created this permanent workshop for kids and how we are self-organizing in it. This manual is, of course, is for all, but is specifically meant for who wants and needs to undertake a similar project. Thus, the book is called How to Open a Pirate Nursery in the Neighborhood and is online. I will end here, but then we can go on.
Okay, thank you, Maddalena. I just want to ask you one question, because I know that you are active in another initiative, Priority to the Schools, that is a kind of another aspect of, let's say, undermining the care for children through the online schooling kind of initiative that is not initiative, sorry, as a process that is present now in Italy. Could you tell us more about what's going on with the, with kind of what are the intentions of the government, and how do you respond for those intentions in relation to this online schooling?
Okay, sure. So to start telling about priorità alla scuola, which translated means priority to school, this growing mobilization of teachers, parents, and students, it is important for me to frame some issues, previous issues related to the Italian public sector, the Italian public school sector, no? Meaning, in a word, the welfare situation, or better, the destruction of it, which, as we know, is not something related to the pandemic, but is something that the pandemic has shown more clearly to more people, no? And to do so, I need to tell some data related to the condition of the Italian public school. So we were speaking before about the GDP percentage. Then I would like to add that in the last 10 years, there was a cut of 10 billion euro and 100,000 teachers in schools. Then a second really strong data is about the fact that the 30% of school workers in Italy are precarious. You have to think that the Europe average is around the 15%, so it's the double. So every 3 teacher is precarious, and this means that every year he or she will change school, will not have a wage in the summer, and things like that. Then the 81% of Italian school workers are women. I underline this aspect because as well as into hospitals, precarious and horrible working conditions often overlap with this data, no? And then we have this early school living, which in Italy is about the 15% of students, meaning that 1 in 7 students do not finish the first level of school, no? And then we have also the fact that the 70% of public school building aren't inadequate, meaning they are literally falling apart, no? So I just add some other data related to the context in which we have introduced, for pandemic reasons, the digital learning, no? That probably has been introduced also in other countries. So here in Italy, 42% of kids, of minors, live in a condition of domestic overcrowding. 38% of families don't have a computer, 38% of families, and 8% of families don't even have a Wi-Fi connection. So this is the context where an emergency schooling process has turned to the digital learning. And it sounds quite clear to everybody that not giving the priority in September to reopen schools in presence when all the production sectors have been opened very quickly will mean to radicalize inequalities and to rise the already very high percentage of early school living, as well as to, let's say, perpetrate a decision which is highly unconstitutional now by removing indefinitely the right of minors to education. So this situation is affecting minors, of course, as well as teachers who are literally burning out while trying to keep together other students and to keep connected their classes. And also parents, I have to say, who are working for free, at least 4 hours per day, and who are facing the loss of their job. In fact, mostly women, again, without the possibility to send their children to school in September, will not be able to go back to work. And this is totally normal from the Italian government perspective. So again, the welfare crack is being paid by people. On the one hand, grandparents who died because keeping children of workers of that 50% of productive activity which have been kept open during the pandemic, and now women who are asked to stay home parenting alone, since it is more important, let's say, to reopen the other 50% of the productive sector rather than schools. But to be more concrete, so what is the government doing, and why is keeping, let's say, school closed indefinitely? Government, for us, of course, is using the pandemic as a huge collective experiment on schools. No, they are starting from a positive unconditional evaluation of the digital learning that was introduced during this month, and they are pushing the request that this method becomes the ordinary one. No, the model is a business school where general welfare overlap with the, I quote, student stakeholder. And this comes without any hidings. They are asking for the expansion of managerial powers, for the abolition of national employment contract, the request to abolish the group class teacher scheme in function of a, let's say, a market individualization of learning. So is the individual student rather than the community that is placed at the center, no? And again, the creation of a middle management sector, while ordinary teachers are asked to, I quote again, turn their activity to the promotion of authentic learning. No? So e-learning is being strongly introduced. And again, also in this context, digital innovation, which is highly quoted, is the Trojan horse to precarize workers, to reduce funding on welfare, and to reduce the time of the public education service. Because in fact, what is at stake here is the full-time school, which is a struggle won in 1971 by previous school movements in order to guarantee to kids, to all kids, despite their family condition, a full and integrated educational model. Naomi Klein was writing a couple of weeks ago that is emerging a coherent doctrine of the pandemic shock that we could definitely call as a Green New Deal. And this is very clear when we talk about schools in Italy, meaning that everything seems to turn much more high-tech than ever, since big tech companies are, let's say, interpreting our last weeks of isolation not as a purpose to saving lives, but as a living experiment of the future, a highly profitable future. So in this scenario, and I close, a huge national mobilization composed by teachers, precarious public school workers, parents, and also students is asking to government, of course, to place public school, meaning the right to education, at the center of its priorities and fundings. By mobilizing, we are rejecting the trap that put in contrast, an old trap that put in contrast the right to health and the right to education, and asking to use the crisis as a moment to where to rebuild a public sector which has been highly privatized and impoverished in the last decades.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would say that this pandemic kind of is used for many experiments and kind of, and I would like to ask Tommy, but before I formulate a question for him, I just want to once again to remind you about the question and answers, comments and questions that you can put on the Money Lab webpage. And I would like to ask Tommy, because you mentioned this flattening the curve and what we are learning from the pandemic that is present now, and Maddalena just mentioned that the kind of two processes, this digital innovation, let's say, that is kind of in this pandemic becoming kind of as a source, I would say, of diminishing certain rights and kind of diminishing of certain, let's say, kind of struggles that were kind of won many years before. Could you maybe tell us, do you see that this pandemic is used as a kind of excuse for certain social experiments that are kind of also have intention to not prevent, but maybe to kind of to reduce kind of collective actions in a social sphere and political sphere, of course?
Well, I wouldn't say that this is an experiment in the sense that it's a result of a design, but definitely there was a lot already in the making before the pandemic struck, and then intense digitization that has happened, and particularly with the shift of work to home for large segment of the labor force, has sped up the processes that were there and that were critically contested. In the conditions of the quarantine, obviously the labor movement and other social movements had huge obstacles to organize and to protest, and could not have done that. So my experience of sort of introduction, rollout of technologies in our university, so Maddalena is at the same research center as myself, Valeria and Marcel, at the Center for Post-Digital Cultures at the Coventry University. And technologies are being used intensively to hand over the control of the academic, educational, research processes over to the managerial staff. And I think what is happening there is a total shift of control from, or balance of power, working against workers in the university, and to a degree working against the students. So in a way, platformization of the university goes hand in hand with managerialism in the university. Now the question is how that institutional reshifting of balance of power will happen in other sectors, where obviously technologization will take a bit more. I've took the example of agriculture. I think that's an interesting place to look at, because it is being currently digitized to a high degree already in the run-up to the pandemic, and especially now with the shortages of seasonal migrant labor in the countries of the capitalist center, with nobody being there to pick salad and asparagus and whatnot. We will see an intense push to introduce more technologies into harvesting and just the whole agricultural process of growing food. At the same time, that will have an effect on ability of migrant workforce to earn wages and to send remittances to countries of the periphery, and it will depress hugely wages and create even greater disparities. So the question is now, how do we contest that? Obviously, that's an uneasy split for, well, I guess pretty much everyone here in this session today who can stay home and work from home, or most of the people who can stay home, who kind of are of our ilk, and the rest of the workforce that cannot, and that is kind of now being heroized, but in the next step will be put under even greater conditions of precarity, austerity, wage suppression, and union busting. I think that's kind of clear that this is in the cards, and then the question is how we can organize counter proposals and different ways of, well, in this case, growing food, but many other things that are more connected and that provide both support to those who are working, provide much better conditions of work, health protections, all that, while finding ways to organize everybody else to create those bonds of solidarity and both bonds of material interdependence.
Thank you. I mean, I propose that we go to Kino Šiška and to see if guests there have a comments or questions. Yeah.
Hrženjak, from a sociologist from the Peace Institute, which is a private research institute and non-governmental organization in Ljubljana, and I would like to thank for all three very interesting presentations. I have to admit that I am a kind of old-fashioned defender of the responsibility of the state for not only for care provision, but also for assuring the quality of services, the quality of working conditions for care workers, and also of equality for the access of to care services. And perhaps the reason for this is that I spent 20 years of my childhood and youth in socialist Yugoslavia, and also that I'm coming from a state, Slovenia, with public schooling system, with a very comprehensive public childcare network, and so on and so on. But on the other hand, of course, we have pretty much marketized elder care, and we are building a coalition to fight against that. What I want to say is that this COVID-19 situation pointed to the importance of public services, and also it pointed that the state can be quite strong and generous if the situation demands that. So, and I also think that actually calling upon the state for responding to the care needs of the population, to be a decent care provider in the time of individualization of care, feminization of care, marketization of care, it also can be a place of resistance. So my question for Tomislav and for Maddalena would be, how do you place the role of the state in your vision and concept of care?
Madhu, do you want to go first?
Yeah, if it's okay for you, yeah, okay. So I thank you for this question, which is very important. So let's say also from the perspective of soprasotto, no? There are two enemies. The first one is that when you build soprasotto, it comes from a need. So this means that there is no care provision around that task of childcare, no? As I was saying before. And when you cover that hole, it's very easy to be pushed both from public and from private institutions towards illegality, no? Because you will never respect bureaucratic standards and so on. But the other enemy, from my perspective, of course, is that we are not building an alternative to build an alternative. This alternative is built within the field of struggles around the process of widening the public sector, no? the problem here is how to balance an alternative that never should become elitist tool, no, but has a common experiment with the scope to strengthen the public sector. This is why, and I close, Sopra Sotto is an alternative nursery which was born for a void, for a public void, but also is in the first line in this priority for school movement in order to strengthen the public sector and let's say put at the center of the political debates the public schools.
Thank you.
Well, first two things. Over the kind of last couple of decades, there has been a process of the contraction of and marketization of universal care provisions in welfare states. Be they of the socialist kind, such as former Yugoslavia, or kind of countries successors of former Yugoslavia, or sort of traditional welfare states, and practices that we are tracking have much to do with the processes that are drivers of that contraction. So that means that welfare provision becomes first means tested, then pegged against workfare conditions. Then you have neoliberal punitive values, where those who cannot work are kind of put on the pillory, et cetera, et cetera. So all that. On the other hand, we are also interested in how labor works in these societies, and there has been a significant shift of the regimes of migration since the 1970s that has led to the current migration crisis, particularly in Europe and the US. And all that has been really a historic process leading up to the current process of current COVID-19 pandemic, where we have seen radical deficiencies of that system, and where people had to self-organize so much in order for members of their community to be able to get by. No? So that's one side of this issue. The other side of the issue is, I think, that when we look at historic development of institutions of universal care provision, they were won through certain struggles. They weren't just made sort of drafted on the paper and deployed. They're a result of worker movements. They are the result of patient movements. They are the result of various social justice claim making. No? And we think that what we are seeing currently as a response to the pandemic sets a new set of demands on that system. And therefore, we find it interesting to track what's happening in these practices and how they are both working within the existing yet inadequate care provision, and are constructing new forms of care provision. This, just to finish off, if you look at the question of environmental transition, fundamental question of organizing production and reproduction in societies will be whether we can shift economies from producing goods to producing relations, both between humans and non-humans. So whether we can create those types of meaningful engagement in societies that repair things that are going broken, no? Or things that are deeply destabilized, particularly in human-environment relations. So I think we need to see this as a historic process, and we have to understand the specificity of the current moment. Yes, sure, COVID-19 has demonstrated the immense capacity of the state and relative insignificance of economies of producing sort of unnecessary goods and centrality of economy that sustains humans and their context. So I think that's a big lesson. But the problem is that as we are going back to normal, we have to find some ground on which to fight for expansion and transformation from within and within as a form of against, also to address hierarchies and disparities. No, like if you want to look at care laborers, they are typically precarious, low-paid, invisible, devalued forms of labor, and unless that is contested, and I think that just claiming that state and institutions, public provision, that might not be enough. No.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would like to add a couple of words around this concept. Can I?
Yeah, sure.
No, following what Tommy was saying, I mean, I think it's also interesting how these days the concept of essential works and workers has entered strongly in the public debate. And let's say on the one hand, probably this new centrality can help to repeat, how all the works related to the maintenance of life are a condition of existence of society, or probably this new centrality could also help to repeat how care tasks are always being crossed by a form of exploitation. But on the other hand, let's say that the ability to decide what is essential and what is not and for whom is a central political fact that even today remains in the hand of a few people. So the debate around essential worker we have heard in these days continue to show us both a space of crossed by injustice and a space crossed by possible political conflict. Now, as Federici always says, the care is part of the problem, but also of the solution. So to be clear, in this month, we had the possibility, the opportunity to see how essential workers are meant for governments, which is something more close to disposal body at work, like a sort of a necropolitic shaping and radicalizing a service class as a sacrificial class, that was abandoned without protection, at least from the Italian perspective, within the epidemic. And I'm not just speaking about hospitals, but also about food delivery workers, but also about teacher and mental health condition in this situation. But again, the importance of to keep at the core this question, what is essential, it is also a radical possibility to rethink a better present, meaning to rethink what we can continue to produce, as Tommy was saying before, and what we cannot, what we want to continue to reproduce, and what is no longer worth reproducing, striking the very condition of possibility of capital. So what is no longer worth keeping alive to improve the same condition of life? So I think this question, what is essential, has become a political terrain we must be able to determine through the production of imaginaries, of struggles, and it is indeed a radical question for which we must, let's say, use all our intelligence in order to create sustainable answer, actually.
Let's go back to Kino Šiška.
Hi. I'm Leah. I'm working at trans feminist institution in Slovenia, and I do peer-to-peer support to trans women, mainly in between other things. And I must confess that I'm very glad to hear and about all these different projects. It gives me hope. I don't have like a formal formal question. Like I would just like to give my own input on that as a person that is struggling and in a community that is also struggling out of the even in the society out of the corona problematic. But with the corona, we saw that for trans people, the care was even less accessible than it was before, and we had a lot of very of emergency situations with people being in danger, being in their own family, and that kind of things. And I would like, and especially we have like the old people that were waiting for medical care for transitioning, for instance, which is already a lot gatekept, like in on everyday basis. But then, like with COVID, it was just impossible. And a lot of, I mean, as a community, we had to learn to organize ourselves even more than usually to do the work of the doctors by ourselves and social workers and all the therapists and that we don't have under the hand, and it's all about the community to do that work, because otherwise it's not happening. And we saw some very good action of solidarity between individuals, sharing meds, sharing information about how to take hormones, which dosage and which thing. Some topics that were maybe not that much shared, or people were not in the normal situation, were not able to take in their hand because they were waiting for the authority of the state person that was supposed to take care for them. And in that situation, it was at least made clear that you're the one who has to count on yourself in this kind of situation. And I heard with a lot of interest the project of Cassie, the hologram project, and all what you had to say about self-organization and about how to maybe take one part of what the state is supposed to do and to integrate it into social practice of every day, and that are also able to squeeze some toxic gender normative organization of the society, generally speaking. So I don't have, like I said, like a really question. I just want to share like this is that experience with you. And if anybody, I'm sorry because I had some question for Cassie. Well, I just wanted to let that here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, great commentary. I mean, I can only echo what you said. I know that Cassie was supposed to say how people can get involved with her project, and then she forgot to film that. And I wrote to her if she can write that up, and I can tell you how to get involved. But she didn't have time to write back. I guess she's flying back to Canada. However, she now has a book coming out, I think, with Pluto, that is laying out the concept of the hologram. And she is organizing workshops where she sort of transfers the skill set and insights that she has developed while working on hologram to other people, so they can slowly start to build their own triangles or kind of hologram situations, and build out that project virally. That's her primary intent, now that it grows from sort of capillary level and rhizomatically creates for people sort of relations of kinship or sort of closeness that sustain them and support them, though that doesn't need to be with friends, it can be also with strangers. Yeah, I think we also did a bit of work on trans issues in our pirate.care syllabus, but unfortunately haven't had so much chance to work on support groups for trans people, but maybe Madu can say a little bit. She has worked with Nonuna Di Meno around various issues concerning gender inequalities and gender non-conforming communities in this current situation. So maybe Madu, you can say a bit more.
Yeah, I mean the point is very crucial, and is all about the fact that has historically crises, let's say, have a double I don't know the word, double expression. So on the one side we have the bad situation and condition that it brings, and on the other side we always find the opportunity that people together find in order to overcome the crisis. Now let's think, and I'm speaking mostly about health crisis in this moment, but let's say if we think at other moments, like for instance the outbreak of HIV, no, and the movement that has taken the street, but also let's say the science, no, opening up this process of how Davor was saying before, the doctor has to be the teacher. No, there the people were becoming, let's say, teacher of the doctor. No, they were opening the pill, opening the health procedures, and taking back the knowledge of the doctors. No, so in this sense they open up a process of against delegation, which is what you were referring before, I think, no? And they start a process of co-designing procedures and healthcare path. So we can see this many times, no? Also inside the Black movement, also in other. Like, for instance, now we are working with sex workers, which, as you can imagine, are in a very bad situation economically, no? But at the same moment, there is a process of connecting, of finding new tools in order to new mutual aid tools in order to somehow socialize the risks of this situation. And I am sure that these new tools will become part of the future, no? Somehow are revealing, are unpacking what new possibilities, no? And this, I think, is the same thing you were underlining within the trans movement. In this last, let's say, years, we are close. Also with Tommy, we are close to groups and and also bioartists who are challenging this this idea of building new strategies in order to design a care for trans people who is less generalized and more close to each own, let's say, necessities, no? So I guess that probably this moment, which has been horrible for the lack of drugs, for the lack of access to medical care, and also for the lack of, let's say, reproductive rights, can also become a moment of empowerment in the future.
Okay, we should move on. Yeah, please.
I guess back to Kinoshishka, or? Yeah. Hi,
Yeah.
I am Maja Ivačič. I'm a social worker, a radical social worker coming from a narco-queer perspective. And that's why I'm maybe more interested in autonomous practices that are trying to build an alternative, not to empower the public sector, but maybe being as a real alternative, as Cassie said, to be able to live through the end of capitalism, hopefully to be able to live through the end of the state. I just wanted to repeat two sentences that really kind of resonated within me. First was what Cassie said, that we don't want to receive care from people who are not cared for. I think this kind of opens a really good perspective of how to think care within a community. And also what Tomislav said on the other side, that solidarity does not automatically imply reciprocity. I think this is also a reality of everybody who is doing community care. So kind of I would like to put together these two thoughts, or at least this is something that I will be thinking on. What I wanted to ask actually, Maddalena, was you said that the parents in the kindergarten or in the nursery do not know each other, that they are not already a pre-formed community. And I have like a quite practical question: how did they come together, and how did you find the teacher? What was the process behind here? Thank you.
Okay. So at first, I mean, the first group of parents came together because we, let's say, the first two families which decide to open this this experiment start to fulfill the neighborhood with banners. And so we did a common meeting into the park, and we discovered at that moment that we were not alone at all, so that there were many parents living the same condition of us, which synthetically are, as I was saying before, people working on this deep sector of culture without any kind of contract, but still working around the clock, and so nevertheless not conceived as workers by the enrollment list metrics. So this was the first attempt and the first way we somehow knew new people. And then every year, since the space is very visible because it's at the top of, it's on the first floor of a street, and since we prefer to use an outdoor learning, so we are always, let's say, in the middle of the street, in the shops of the neighborhood, and so on. So people get to know us like by walking. This is to answer your question. Regarding the things, the thoughts before, I don't know. I'm quite interested on how interested. It's a strong word. I'm impressed about how everyone now, since 2 months, in the mainstream level, is speaking about this new centrality of care, no? But what I think is that care has entered to this realm, to this mainstream debates in the worst way it could. So somehow it's important to let's say, we need to restart from the feminist perspective, which has underlined the ambiguity of care, no? Has an emotional space of interdependence, but also has an exhausting daily reproduction of relationship of exploitation. So if we think, like you were saying before, and Tommy as well, care in a broad sense, no, of reproduction of human life, but also has a regeneration process of the planet's finite resources. In this sense, care is increasingly a conflictual realm, no, in this context of extractive capitalism. And let's say care, which from our perspective is always a collective care, a common care, no? Otherwise it works, is a work subjected to capital and patriarchy rules, become a practice which consequently generate social forms that are really worth reproducing, no? Conversely, the model and the ethic of care that we have listened in this last month represent, as I was saying, the worst way in which care could come back at the center of all debate, because it's a top-down care, and more specifically it has become a war between models of care, which are all related to the scope of reopening the productive sector as soon as possible, no? Everything now and quickly, without any reflection on productivity and limits. So let's say, in a word, everyone is speaking about care, but this care we are speaking about is the care for capital accumulation, which is nothing new, no? If we look at feminist thoughts such as Federici and many others, and their analysis on the role of social reproduction. So from my point of view, we need to somehow deepen the political reasons of care also when we come to think at the role of autonomy and autonomous community.
Thank you. Maybe we can hear some comments from chat or questions if there were any.
Hello.
Janica, please.
Yep. So the first one will be from Kai Green, and it says, do you consider your work to be in fundamental opposition to neoliberal structures? For example, as an activist, hacker, and or opponent? In which case, what is your view of fields such as social enterprise or social entrepreneurship, which pragmatically attempts to forge a compromise with neoliberalism? Is there an argument for balancing activist, idealist positions with business as usual?
Okay, Tommy, would you like to answer the question?
Yeah, I can try to take the question. So I think the fundamental problem of social enterprise is not whether you can produce to inequitable way, democratic way, to social needs. I think you can, and that is a commendable effort within the world which we exist. Now, ultimately, everybody has to earn a wage in a capitalist world in this or another, this way or another way, or at least some money get by to get by. So I have no moral point about that. If social enterprise is well organized and it instills relations of equality between people working together and trying to sustain themselves and earn a wage, I think that's great. And if it can produce something that is valuable for social transformation, that's a difficult word to extrapolate, but let's just put it for the time being like that. I think that's important. The problem is obviously that this cannot exist without an ecology of similar such enterprises, that produce the social needs and that they can carry the transformation forward, that any single one of these social enterprises is not exposed to the larger obtaining conditions of the capitalist markets, which deeply undercut their sustainability or kind of push them toward compromising their principles. And this is, I guess, where the rub lies. If you look, for instance, for, the example of free software, something that was created from a place of autonomy and a place of collaboration and a place where at least property form did not accrue value to individuals. I think we have seen over the last 10 years that this has become the tool of largest technological giants, and that the fact that it was free made it useful for them to contest the existing incumbents, the existing monopolies, to install themselves as a monopoly. So that's the problem there, that power relations exist at multiple scales and they are interconnected. So I think that's a larger problem of transformation, that I don't think that it can happen simply incrementally. That's what makes the current moment so specific, interesting, and urgent, that situations of upheaval, uncertainty, where people face their own sustenance, survival, are really very, very important to asking the question, what is the purpose of the economy? What do we want to produce? Under what conditions do we want to produce? So that's my take on social enterprise.
Thank you. Do you have other comments or questions from chat?
Yeah. So the second would be from Magic Kane. Can someone provide some examples of successful hackerspaces or makerspaces that actively promote LGBTQIA inclusive practices? They link to the pirate.care syllabus, saying that is a great resource page, but I could not find examples of such spaces on the page. We received one link in the chat from Vesna already, but perhaps you could give more input.
Madhu, do you want to take this? Yeah, I'm more connected maybe to hackerspaces, but to feminist hackerspaces, Madhu would have closer contacts. I mean, we have worked with some people who are hacking technology and doing so from a decolonial, feminist, anti-capitalist perspective, which is obviously not always the case with hackerspaces and makerspaces. We have, as part of our syllabus, a contribution on gender equality in makerspaces that was written by Zoe Romano, who herself runs or used to run a space that was aimed at creating technology for the types of social needs which are not necessarily addressed by the technological development, for instance, for people with disability. But maybe Madhu, you can say more. No.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to cite Zoe Romano too, and then this makerspace which is called We Make, where she have worked a lot. Now she's opening this new space which is more wet lab, which is kin lab. And then I would suggest to have a look in at the hangar.org, which is this cultural institution based in Barcelona, where they are very much focused on this aspect, and around which there are a lot of spaces and let's say practitioners such as Paula Pin or Quimera Rosa, which are working with all this topics in different way, of course, but there is a very nice, let's say, cluster where to look at.
And maybe a resource to look at is Cornelia Zolfran's work on cyberfeminisms.
Okay, maybe we can get another comment or question. That will be the last one because we need to conclude the session.
If I may, we would have two more questions or comments. The first one is from Thorvald Silver. It seems that all our struggles at this moment are localized, since firstly, they come from local needs, and secondly, the pandemic turned all of us inwards. Should we internationalize them, so the struggles? And if so, how to internationalize them?
Should we take the other one as well, and then we...
Okay.
Sorry.
So, yeah, so the second one is from 𝗙𝗶𝘁𝗆. Wonder if someone here can give them a pointer for where they could begin reading to understand the rising power of the managerial class and how to resist it, and the related dangers of individualization, commodification of communal rituals and programs.
Okay. Madhu, do you want to take...
I leave you the second question, and I try to...
Okay.
I don't know. I'm yeah. Of course, is a central, is a crucial, let's say, concern. But I'm not sure if we are doing different things in local, let's say, areas. I have more the perception that we are building communities and, let's say, political strike in locally, of course, but which are really connected to other struggles around the world. Let's think for instance, at the rent strike, which is occurring now since a couple of months, which has let's say started from North America, but then has taken all many other countries, and for instance here in Italy is very strong, and it's about organizing the rent strike, which is of course, let's say, again a necessity, but also a strong collective risk that we are taking in order to survive. Simply. So let's say that probably, yeah, in this sense, open technology or critic technology can help in this internationalization of fights. And what I see also in this last month is that, let's say, as we were saying before, big tech is all investing in this capitalistic care, while open tech are connecting people around the world into issues such as strike, as the rent strike, or care provisions, or how to deal with like drugs that I don't receive anymore. So I think here technology can play a huge role.
Yeah, to Thorvald's question, zdravo. Yeah, I think that fundamental question of internationalism is how do we politicize the current moment? Because, as you say, we are turned inward, contained within national borders or European Union borders now with more relaxation in this part of the world. And I think when we work with pirate.care, we are trying to capture knowledge that is specific and local. But I think that it also provides certain learning for people working elsewhere to build their own struggles on their own terms. Obviously, this doesn't work neatly, but knowledge creation, something that Davor has started with Andrija Štampar and information, I guess that's knowledge. We have to make sure that that knowledge is not captured only by the technological powers that be. That technological managerial class does not transform all practical knowledge created in the web of social relations into something that is managed through technological systems and organizes us. So I think that's kind of one critical moment that we should really dwell on. And I think politicizing, that's why we are looking at the notion of piracy, but also implication of piracy. If you don't contest the order, the regime, the division, then you are working locally and you might be addressing sort of immediate needs. But the problem is that obtaining conditions will necessarily put pressure on you, and you have to really make your struggle be supported from all sides. I guess food is a good example. Like, most countries cannot sustain themselves, and obviously there is necessity to maintain supply chains, regardless if they're profitable or not. And we can bring some critical acumen to that. We can push back against the conditions that are created to produce that food in a highly capitalist, highly efficient way that has no regard for human labor and nature. I don't know, this doesn't answer exactly how to internationalize at this moment, but that's a larger problem for progressive movements at this moment. How do you internationalize in a way that does not follow the sinews of capital and economic globalization? And then the question on managerialism, I guess a good place to start is The Control Revolution by James Bender, who's a sociologist working in cyber sociology, who wrote about the rise of bureaucracy in the 19th century to coordinate expanding capitalist production and exchange, which in a way brought the modern administrative system into existence. And if we want to push that further, and he certainly does that because he comes from system theory and cybernetic theory, he says principally that control and command are always a problem of complexity that needs to be resolved. And that's exactly what technological giants are providing today. Many will say, technology is a good way to optimize and get rid of bureaucracy. No, I think they go hand in hand. Like, you cannot automate before you bureaucratize, and you automate in order to bring more power to the managerial class. So I think that's kind of a good historical work. Dumenil and I can't recall the other surname, they speak of neoliberal managerial turn, and they are looking at how managerial class has become central in neoliberal development. I don't know if you can send me your address or just some contact. I'll send you over some materials. I can't see here the chat, so sorry.
Okay, thank you, both of you, Maddalena and Tommy, and also recorded Cassie. Also, thank you all in 𝗏𝗏𝗆𝗆. I think that, at least I've learned a lot from today, and I've learned not to romanticize care, but also to think about it not just in the terms of interdependency, but also as exhausted work. Also, that we need to think about care on a very different scales, from kind of public health system, example in immunology, to the scale of the individual person, where we need to kind of learn from her needs what is needed for care for individual persons. So scales are very different. We are facing with different kind of aspects of care. And thank you all for listening us. And before we finished, I would give the floor to our host, 𝗤𝗏 Janša from Axioma.
Thank you, Davor. Thanks for leading the session. Thanks to you as well, Cassie, Tomislav, Maddalena, for sharing with us your thoughts. And thanks also to our special guests in studio and to the audience online for your contribution and your questions and comments. Today's panel was developed in partnership with Rijeka 2020 European Capital of Culture and co-produced together with 𝗏𝗏𝗆𝗆 in the framework of 𝗏𝗏𝗆𝗆 platform for contemporary investigative art. It wouldn't have been possible without the effort of the entire staff of the Axioma Institute of Contemporary Art Ljubljana, Marcela, Sonia, Nika, Walter, and the technical skills of our broadcast director, Jan Marin. The next panel, entitled Housing, Hacking the Crisis of Home, is scheduled for Monday, June 8th at 5 p.m. Central European Time, always at axioma.org/manilab8. With us, there will be the investigative journalist and podcaster 𝗙𝗏𝗆𝗏𝗏, the artist and researcher Vian Chan from the group of artists, legal theorists, and economists Form of Ownership, and the designer and researcher Maxim Rockmanico of the shared ownership housing platform DOMA. The panel will be moderated by the sociologist Klemen Ploštajner of the housing cooperative Zadrugator. Thanks for being with us today. See you next week.